They told me I wasn't good enough to sit at their table. Not because I was rude, not because I was uninvited, but because I was dirty. Grease on my shirt, oil under my nails, and 20 minutes late. I missed the start of my wealthy son-in-law's mother's birthday dinner. Why? Because I stopped to help a woman stranded on the side of the highway. She was elegant, powerful, a woman whose shoes alone probably cost more than my rent. I thought nothing of it, just doing what I've done my whole life, fixing what's broken. I didn't know helping her would shatter everything. I didn't know she'd show up at that same party moments after I was humiliated. And I certainly didn't expect what she'd say next to turn the room upside down. This isn't just a story about shame, it's about dignity and the quiet revenge of being exactly who you are. The hum of the old refrigerator was the only sound in Doris Miller's apartment. It ticked rhythmically, an old warrior fighting to keep going, much like her. Sunlight streamed through the dusty blinds, catching the faded edges of a floral curtain she hadn't changed in 15 years. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee grounds, the scent of a life lived in routine. She reached for her chipped mug, her favorite, the one with the cartoon cardinal, and poured what was left of the pot into it. It was lukewarm, but she didn't mind. Doris had stopped minding little things a long time ago. It had been 6 years since Harold died, 3 since Olivia moved across the city with her husband Jacob, and just about forever since Doris had shared a meal with someone in this apartment. She sat at the small table, her back straight despite the ache in her lower spine, and stared at the framed photo near the microwave. Olivia at her college graduation, Doris beside her in a hand-sewn dress, her smile wide and proud. Back then, things had felt possible. She remembered the years clearly, the long shifts at the appliance repair shop, then working out of her garage after she was laid off. She fixed everything from broken toasters to malfunctioning dryers, often for neighbors who couldn't afford a proper technician. Sometimes they paid her with pies or homegrown tomatoes. She never complained. She only had one goal: raise Olivia well. No second marriages, no distractions, just work, save, and love. And Olivia had rewarded her with good grades, scholarships, and eventually a business degree. She was proud of her daughter, always had been, even when Olivia started dating Jacob Whitmore. Jacob came from a different world, moneyed, polished, impeccably dressed. He spoke in calm, clipped tones, always with a hint of practiced charm. But there was something distant in his eyes, something quietly disapproving. The first time they met, Doris had offered him a firm handshake and a warm smile. He'd returned it with a glance at her oil-stained jeans and asked, "So, you work with your hands?" Doris had nodded proudly. 40 years, built a whole life fixing things other people throw away. He hadn't replied, just smiled thinly and moved on. Since the wedding, Doris had seen her daughter less. Dinners got canceled, texts went unanswered for days. Olivia always sounded tired. "Jacob's busy with work," she'd say. "We're planning a move. His family wants us closer." And then silence. Still, Doris held on to her belief that living with kindness and integrity would eventually matter. That one day her son-in-law would see the value in what she'd done, how she'd sacrificed, worked, built, and raised his wife into the brilliant woman she was now. That maybe, just maybe, he'd see her not as a burden, but as a human being. She rinsed her mug, wiped it dry with a dish towel embroidered with fading sunflowers, and placed it carefully on the rack. Her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the stillness. It was Olivia. "Jacob wants you to come to his mother's birthday dinner tonight, 7 p.m., Worthington Hills Country Club. Please be on time. Wear something nice. No, hi, Mom. No, love you. Just that." Doris stared at the screen, her heart thudding, not with excitement, but with something closer to hesitation. She'd never been invited to anything by Jacob's family. In fact, she wasn't even sure they remembered her name. But this might be a chance. Maybe Olivia had convinced Jacob to include her. Maybe it was a step forward. Maybe things were changing. She placed the phone down and stood up, the ache in her knees sharper than usual. She had an old navy blouse she hadn't worn since Olivia's graduation. A bit snug now, but decent. And she had $78 tucked away in a tin labeled for emergencies. Maybe she could get a small gift, something tasteful. She straightened her back, as if reminding herself that dignity didn't require wealth, just effort. As she stepped into the hallway toward her bedroom, she paused by the mirror. Her reflection showed silver hair pulled into a tight bun, worry lines etched deep, and eyes that still carried softness despite everything. She gave herself a nod. Tonight she would show up. Doris sat on the edge of her bed, the phone still in her hand. The message from Olivia had been brief, but it vibrated in her chest like thunder. Jacob wants you to come. Not Olivia wants you there. Not we'd love to see you. No warmth, no invitation, just an obligation disguised as formality. She closed her eyes for a moment. Was it really an invitation or just a performance? Did Jacob want her there to be polite or to keep up appearances for his influential family? Still, it was a door cracked open, and Doris, ever the believer in giving people chances, was determined to walk through it. She pulled down the small metal tin from the top shelf of her closet. Inside were years of frayed bills and coin wrappers, a lifetime of setting aside dollars here and there. It wasn't much, but she counted the bills carefully. $78. It would be enough for a modest gift, something elegant but not flashy, something that said, "Thank you for including me," without begging for approval. At the department store, the lights were bright and the sales associates looked polished, perfumed, and far younger than she remembered. She wandered past glittering displays of handbags and high-end lotions until she found the gift section. Silver frames, decorative vases, scented candles in sleek jars. All of them bore price tags that made her stomach tighten. A young woman in a blazer noticed her hesitation and approached. "Looking for something special?" Doris nodded. "Birthday gift. Something respectful." The clerk smiled, not condescending, just professional. "Any preferences?" "Nothing flashy," Doris said, "but something that feels thoughtful." The clerk led her to a small, elegantly boxed jewelry tray, slate blue velvet with delicate gold trim, the kind of item that seemed both useful and refined. It was marked down from $110 to $68. Doris held it gently. It had weight, grace. It was just within her budget. "I'll take it," she said softly. As the clerk rang up the purchase, Doris glanced toward the entrance. A woman stood there, holding the hand of a small boy. The woman's coat was too thin for the season, her shoes cracked and worn. She clutched a plastic bag instead of a purse. Doris watched quietly as the woman approached the customer service counter, asking if a lost and found had turned up a small wallet. She was turned away with polite regret. Doris slipped a $10 bill from her pocket and folded it tightly. She walked past the pair, brushing lightly against the woman's hand as if by accident. When the woman looked down, the bill was there, tucked discreetly in her palm. The mother's eyes lifted to meet Doris's. No words, just a look, surprise, confusion, then deep, wordless gratitude. Doris kept walking. The gift bag felt heavier now, but not because of the tray. It was the knowledge that 78 had become 68, and 68 had just become 58. And somehow, her heart felt lighter. Later, as she stepped out into the winter afternoon, wind curling around her coat, she checked the time. 5:10 p.m. She had almost 2 hours before the party. Plenty of time to go home, change, and make the 40-minute drive to Worthington Hills. The highway buzzed with weekend traffic, brake lights blinking in rhythm. The sky was beginning to shift into gold and rose hues, the kind that always reminded Doris of spring mornings with Harold on the porch. Back then, they didn't have much, but the silence between them had always felt full. Just past exit 12, Doris saw the flash of hazard lights. A silver Mercedes sat at a sharp angle on the shoulder, hood propped open like a wounded bird. Steam billowed faintly from the engine. A woman stood beside it, pacing slightly, one hand pressed to her temple as she stared at the engine like it had insulted her. Doris's foot eased off the gas. She passed the car, then slowed, checked her mirrors, and pulled to the shoulder 50 yards ahead. Inside her glove box was a worn pair of work gloves. In the trunk, a red toolbox that had traveled more miles than most people's luggage. She got out, pulled on the gloves, and walked toward the stranded woman. As she approached, she could hear the woman muttering, frustration and worry in her voice. She turned at the sound of footsteps. "Car trouble?" Doris asked gently, keeping her distance. The woman was in her mid-60s, dressed in a tailored blazer and silk scarf. Her shoes were spotless. Her face showed stress but also pride, the kind that didn't accept help easily. "Yes," the woman said. "It just died." "I'm Doris," she said, gesturing toward the engine. "I used to fix appliances. Cars, too, when I had to." The woman hesitated, then stepped aside. "Elaine, if you can figure out what's wrong, I'd be grateful." Doris smiled softly. "Let's see what you've got under here." As she leaned over the engine bay, tools in hand, a small voice inside her whispered, "You're going to be late." But louder than that was another voice. "Someone needs help. You know what to do." The engine hissed once, coughed, then rumbled back to life. Doris stepped back from the Mercedes, wiping her hands on an old towel she'd pulled from her trunk. Her shirt had a fresh smear of oil across the front, and her fingertips were black with grease. But the car was running. That was what mattered. Elaine Carson exhaled a long breath and blinked in disbelief. "You actually fixed it." Doris gave a small shrug. "It was just the serpentine belt. The tensioner was worn. I rigged it with a bungee cord and a little luck. You'll make it to wherever you're going, but get it looked at soon." Elaine looked down at her perfectly polished shoes, then at Doris's hands. Grimy, aged, capable. "You have no idea how much this means. I was going to be late for a very important dinner." Doris smiled. "Seems like we both have that problem." There was a pause, the kind that lingers not out of awkwardness but mutual understanding. Elaine stepped forward, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a slim leather wallet and thumbed through the bills. "Please," she said, offering 2 crisp 20s. "You saved me." Doris raised her palm, gently pushing the money away. "No, thank you. I didn't stop for a reward, just doing what I can." Elaine blinked. "Then, at least your number. So I can send a thank you, or call you next time my engine decides to misbehave." Doris hesitated. There was something about Elaine that she liked. Calm, elegant, but not condescending. Yet still, something in her resisted the exchange. "I don't give out my number," Doris said gently. "I fix things when I can, and that's enough." Elaine smiled, half amused, half moved. "You're a rare kind, Doris Miller." Doris simply nodded, gathering her tools. "Drive safe." As the Mercedes merged back into traffic, Doris stood alone beside her aging Toyota, the sky darkening above her. She checked the time, 6:52 p.m. She'd be late, very late, but she had to try. She cleaned her hands the best she could with wipes from the glove box and changed her shirt in the back seat, swapping the oil-stained navy blouse for a cardigan that smelled faintly of mothballs and hope. Her hair, once neatly pinned, now curled wildly around her ears. No time for mirrors, no time for fear. By the time she pulled into Worthington Hills Country Club, the parking lot was nearly full. Luxury sedans lined the entrance. BMWs, Audis, one Maserati. Her old Toyota looked like a misplaced delivery vehicle. Still, she smoothed her skirt, grabbed the gift bag, and walked with purpose. Inside, the air smelled of champagne and expensive perfume. The lighting was dim, deliberate, making the crystal chandeliers sparkle like ice. Doris spotted Olivia first, her daughter's silhouette elegant in a navy dress, shoulders tense, standing beside Jacob near the fireplace. Surrounding them were guests in tailored suits and cocktail gowns, sipping drinks and murmuring soft pleasantries. Jacob turned at the sound of the door and froze. Doris gave a small wave. "Sorry, I'm late." His smile never reached his eyes. "You're here." Olivia hurried over, concern flickering behind her smile. "Mom, are you okay? You look—" "I stopped to help someone on the road," Doris said. "Didn't plan on it, but it felt right." Before Olivia could respond, a voice sharper than champagne cut through the room. "Who is this?" Marilyn Whitmore, Jacob's mother, stood beside the dining table, her expression taut with disbelief. Her pearls gleamed against her collarbone, and her heels clicked audibly as she approached. Jacob stepped forward. "Mother, this is Doris, Olivia's mother." Marilyn's eyes swept over Doris from head to toe, the hair, the cardigan, the slightly smudged gift bag. She said nothing at first, just raised one sculpted eyebrow. "You're late," she said finally. "I know," Doris replied, offering the gift. "Happy birthday." Marilyn accepted the bag with 2 fingers, holding it like it might stain her. Then, to everyone's surprise, she smiled, thin and brittle. "Well, I suppose we should take our seats." Doris followed them to the dining room, heart pounding but steady. She reached for a chair at the long polished table, but Jacob's hand landed on her arm. "Actually," he said quietly, "perhaps it's best if you sit elsewhere." Doris blinked. "Excuse me?" He leaned in, voice low but cutting. "You're not exactly presentable. This is an important event with important guests." She stared at him. "I came here because I was invited. I brought a gift. I helped someone who needed it." He shrugged. "That's admirable, but this isn't the place for charity stories." Marilyn chimed in, now behind them. "If you can't meet the standard, dear, no one's forcing you to stay." For a moment, the room blurred. The scent of perfume, the flicker of candles, the soft tinkle of crystal. It all faded behind the rising silence in her ears. Doris stepped back from the table. "Understood," she said. No anger, just clarity. The dining room fell silent as Doris stood by her chair, her hand still resting on the polished backrest. Conversation ceased mid-sentence. A few guests glanced toward the host, waiting for direction on how to respond to the moment's awkwardness. Jacob, ever so composed, took a slow sip of his wine before placing the glass gently back on the table. He turned to the crowd with a faint smile. Too polite to be genuine. Too calm to be kind. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice carrying just enough to ensure everyone heard. "But people who show up looking like this—" He gestured lightly toward Doris with a flick of his manicured fingers. "Shouldn't expect to sit with decent company." There it was, delivered with surgical cruelty wrapped in civility, the kind of insult that wore a tuxedo and smiled for the camera. Doris felt the words land, not loud, but heavy, not angry, but final. She looked around the table, faces quickly averting, eyes diving into wine glasses, napkins, and untouched plates. And then, Olivia. Her daughter sat still, her knuckles white against the silverware. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her eyes met Doris's, wide and wet, but she said nothing. That silence cut deeper than Jacob's words. Doris straightened. Her jaw tightened, but her shoulders stayed loose. Not because she wasn't hurt, she was, but because something inside her had decided this moment wouldn't define her. She turned to leave. No theatrics, no tears, just quiet dignity. She'd made it 3 steps toward the foyer when the front door opened with a soft click. A woman in a navy blazer and elegant scarf stepped in, her heels tapping smartly on the marble floor. She paused, glanced around the room, and smiled with poised warmth. It was Elaine Carson. Doris froze. Jacob froze. The guests froze. And in the suspended breath of the room, Elaine's gaze landed directly on Doris and broke into a radiant, astonished grin. "Doris!" she called, her voice rising with joy. "Oh my goodness, what are the chances?" The temperature in the room shifted like someone had flung the windows open. All pretense evaporated. Jacob turned a shade paler. Marilyn's wine glass trembled ever so slightly in her hand. Elaine crossed the foyer, her arms opening with genuine delight. "You made it," she said, wrapping Doris in a hug that didn't care about grease or cardigan fibers. Doris, too stunned to speak, found herself embraced by the woman she'd helped on the side of the highway just hours earlier. Elaine stepped back, her eyes glimmering. "You wouldn't believe how I've been telling everyone about you since this afternoon. My mechanic, my angel. You saved me." The word angel echoed through the dining room like a dropped glass. Jacob cleared his throat, struggling to summon his practiced calm. "Mrs. Carson," he said, stepping forward with a forced smile. "What a surprise to see you here, so early." Elaine turned toward him, her warmth now professional, precise. "Jacob Whitmore, I assume you weren't expecting me until dessert?" "Of course not," he said quickly. "I mean, yes, we just weren't aware you'd arrived." "I wanted to drop in before heading back downtown," Elaine replied smoothly, her eyes flicking toward Doris again with admiration, "and I'm glad I did." She stepped closer to the dining table, placing her purse on the sideboard, surveying the silent guests, then turning back to Doris. "I owe this woman my entire evening. Without her, I'd still be stranded on the interstate." Marilyn stepped in, voice sugar-drenched. "Well, isn't that just delightful?" Elaine's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Indeed." Then turning to Jacob, she added casually, "I imagine you didn't know who she was when you made that comment a moment ago." Jacob's expression faltered. "Comment?" Elaine's tone remained cool. "The one about people not deserving to sit with decent company. Sounded quite familiar from across the foyer." Doris stood rooted, watching it unfold like a play in which she had accidentally become the protagonist. Jacob chuckled, a hollow sound. It was just misunderstood humor. Elaine looked around, her gaze sharp now. Was it? A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Marilyn jumped in. "Of course, it was nothing serious. We were just surprised by her appearance, that's all." Elaine's smile vanished. She helped me on the highway, hands in the engine, grease on her arms, completely unbothered by status or inconvenience. That's not something to be judged. It's something to be honored. No one spoke. Then Elaine added, her voice calm but edged in steel. "And to clarify, Doris is not just my mechanic. She's the reason I'm here. And as some of you may already know, I'm here tonight as a strategic investor in Whitmore Industries." Twist dropped. Gasps moved around the table like a gust of wind through trees. Jacob's jaw clenched. Marilyn swayed slightly, as if steadying herself with the back of her chair. Elaine turned to Doris, smiling again. "Come, sit with me, please." Doris sat quietly beside Elaine at the long dining table, her posture upright, her hands folded in her lap. Across from her, Jacob poured wine with mechanical grace, avoiding eye contact. To Doris's left, Marilyn stared straight ahead, the corners of her mouth twitching like she was holding back bile. Olivia had not moved from her seat at the far end. Her eyes flicked toward her mother, then darted away again. But Doris wasn't watching them anymore. Her mind had begun to drift, not out of boredom, not out of detachment, but because some wounds, the deepest ones, don't scream. They whisper, and in moments like this, they come back in waves. It was Olivia's 10th birthday. Their little apartment smelled faintly of paint, thinner from the neighbors' repairs downstairs. Doris had cleaned all morning, scrubbing the counter, wiping the windows, trying to make the place feel like a celebration, even if there was no party. She'd worked a double shift the day before. Her arms ached. Her feet throbbed, but she'd saved just enough to buy a small packet of noodles and 2 candles from the corner store. She'd boiled the water carefully, placed the noodles into a chipped ceramic bowl, and stuck the candles in upright, one leaning slightly to the side. She'd even drawn a smiley face on a napkin and set it next to the bowl like it was a place card at a fine dinner. And when Olivia walked in, face flushed from the playground, her backpack bouncing against her back, she stopped short, blinking at the cake. Then she smiled, a wide, genuine, unforced smile. "Wow, Mom," she said, dropping her bag and sitting down at the table. "That's awesome." Doris had blinked, startled. "You think so?" "Of course," Olivia said, scooping up noodles with a fork too big for her hand. "It's the best birthday ever. Just us." Doris had laughed, really laughed, and it filled the room with something richer than music. She had never forgotten that moment, never forgotten the feeling that maybe, just maybe, love didn't need grand gestures. Maybe, if you gave someone your heart quietly, consistently, they would remember. Back at the country club table, Doris blinked and returned to the present. The candlelight here was softer, gentler, but it couldn't mask the stiffness in Olivia's shoulders, the way she kept pretending to check her phone just to avoid meeting her mother's gaze. Doris looked down at her plate. Roast duck with balsamic glaze. Expensive, perfectly cooked, flavorless. Her thoughts began to spiral. Had she been wrong? Had it been foolish to give everything without asking for anything back? To sacrifice Friday nights, Christmas mornings, personal dreams, so Olivia could have shoes without holes, books for college, and braces when the school insurance wouldn't cover them. She had chosen loneliness over romance, secondhand sweaters over a personal wardrobe, long shifts and double jobs instead of time for herself. And in return, a daughter who couldn't look her in the eye, a son-in-law who treated her like a stain on fine linen, and a birthday party that considered her a disruption rather than a guest. Doris reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. Elaine leaned in gently. "You okay?" Doris nodded, her smile brave but thin. "Yes, just memories." Elaine said nothing more, but she placed a hand lightly over Doris's, and the touch was warm, anchoring. Around them, the conversation resumed, shallow and forced. Jacob was trying to recover, steering talk toward mergers and city council decisions. Marilyn had resumed her role as social coordinator, directing servants and praising hors d'oeuvres. But Doris, she sat in silence, her ears ringing with the echo of that childhood birthday. The one with no guests, no gifts, no cake, only a daughter's laughter. Had that been real? Had it meant something? Or had Olivia been playing a part even then, learning early to smile at poverty the way one learns to tolerate a stain on a borrowed dress? Doris didn't want to believe that. She didn't want to think of love as something transactional, but tonight had placed a crack in that belief, a fracture that had let doubt in, like cold air under a door. Still, she said nothing. Because invisible wounds don't beg for bandages. They wait, sometimes forever. Elaine Carson hadn't touched her wine. Instead, she turned her attention to Jacob with the gentle but unmistakable force of a woman used to conducting boardroom negotiations and unmasking shallow charm. "So, Jacob," she said lightly, but her tone clipped. "Before I arrived, I believe there was a comment made about Doris's appearance?" Jacob stiffened. It was misunderstood, a joke, really. Elaine smiled, but there was no humor in it. A joke at the expense of someone who stopped her car, rolled up her sleeves, and fixed mine, when she could have driven past like everyone else did? The table quieted. Marilyn sipped her drink as if hoping to melt into the glass. Elaine didn't flinch. "I'm curious, is this how your company treats people it depends on? Dismisses competence because it doesn't come wrapped in designer labels?" Jacob tried to laugh. "We're very inclusive, Elaine. I'm sure you understand this was an isolated incident." "No," Elaine said, voice now firm. "I don't understand. I was under the impression that Whitmore Industries valued character. That's why I was considering an investment." A murmur ran around the table. Jacob's eyes widened. Marilyn blinked, her mouth falling open slightly. Elaine folded her hands, her elbows resting calmly on the table. "I've had your proposal on my desk for 3 months," she continued. "Your team knows I've been debating between 2 final candidates. I flew in today to make my final decision." Jacob's voice caught. I didn't realize it was that close." Elaine nodded. It was. The word hovered like a blade. "I was going to announce it this week," she added. "A $2 million equity investment, strategic partnership, full backing. But after what I've seen tonight..." She let the silence do the rest. Marilyn leaned forward, trying to rescue the moment with the charm she'd honed at 1,000 other gatherings. "Elaine, dear," she said sweetly, "you mustn't let one misunderstanding cloud such an important decision. Doris is... well, she's a sweet woman, but let's be honest. She's a technician, a repair woman." She smiled apologetically toward Doris, then turned back to Elaine. "I'm sure you understand." Elaine's face turned still. "A repair woman," she repeated. "Yes, a humble one," Marilyn said quickly. "Worked with her hands all her life, I believe. Electrical work or some such." Elaine exhaled slowly. "You know, I've invested in hundreds of companies over the last 30 years, and the one thing I've learned, consistently, is this. The world needs more people who know how to repair things, and far fewer people who are so good at breaking them." Marilyn's smile faltered. Doris slowly pushed back her chair. Her knees protested slightly, but she stood clutching her bag. "This was a mistake," she said softly. "I didn't mean to cause a scene. I'll be on my way." Elaine turned sharply toward her. "No!" Everyone froze. Elaine stood too, elegant and composed, but with fire in her voice now. "You don't go anywhere." Doris paused. "I really don't belong here." Elaine stepped closer. "You're the only person here who does, and if you leave, so do I." Jacob sat bolt upright. "Elaine, please." "No." She turned back to him. "Let me be perfectly clear. If Doris leaves this table, if she is made to feel like she does not deserve to be heard, seen, or respected, then I walk out that door and take every cent of my investment with me." A sharp breath swept across the room. "You asked for my money," Elaine continued, her voice now firm with conviction. "But what you really need is character, and if you lack it, no amount of capital will save your business." She turned to Doris, eyes softening. "Please, sit beside me. You changed my day. Maybe even more than that. Let me return the favor, just by standing beside you now." Doris hesitated. She looked at Olivia, whose face was pale, torn. Jacob's lips were pressed tight. Marilyn had gone completely still. Then she looked at Elaine and saw nothing but sincerity. Doris pulled out her chair and slowly sat down. Elaine sat beside her. The meal resumed, but the air had changed entirely. Elaine engaged Doris directly, asking about her years working electrical repair, the way she used to juggle jobs to raise Olivia, how she taught herself to fix almost anything because life rarely offered help when you needed it. And Doris, cautious at first, spoke. Not grandly, not with flourish, but with clarity. And for the first time in years, someone really listened. Across the table, Jacob and Marilyn smiled occasionally, stiffly. Olivia sat in silence. But Doris... She felt something begin to shift, not just the room, but her place in it. She didn't know what came next, but for once she didn't feel small. She felt seen. Elaine set her fork down quietly on the porcelain plate, the clink echoing louder than expected in the tension-laced silence. Her gaze swept the length of the table, her lips pursed in thought. Around her, the guests had returned to their meals, or pretended to. Conversation had dwindled to hushed whispers and awkward glances. She folded her napkin and placed it neatly on the table. Then she spoke. "Let me ask all of you a question," Elaine said, her voice firm, clear, and devoid of pretense. Every eye turned to her. If Doris here were the mother of a hedge fund manager or a tech mogul or a real estate tycoon, would you have treated her the same way tonight? The air shifted. Nobody answered. Elaine's expression didn't soften. I'll wait. The silence pressed inward like gravity. Forks paused mid-air. Wine glasses remained untouched. Even the servers had frozen near the kitchen door. Sensing something irreversible was about to unfold, Jacob cleared his throat. Elaine, that's not fair. Oh, but it is, she snapped, her tone cutting clean. It's the fairest question in the room, and we all know the answer. She turned her gaze toward Marilyn, who looked like she'd swallowed vinegar. You, Marilyn. Would you have handed her the gift bag like it might stain your manicure if she'd walked in wearing pearls and a Chanel dress? Marilyn flinched. Of course not. I mean, of course I would have welcomed... No, Elaine interrupted. You wouldn't have, because you didn't. You saw someone who looked less than, and you treated her like trash. You all did. The table went still. Elaine stood up. Her stature wasn't imposing, but in that moment she seemed to tower over every seated guest. Calm, elegant, dangerous. I've sat in enough boardrooms to know that when people reveal who they are, it's foolish to ignore it. Her eyes locked with Jacob's. You thought I wouldn't find out what you said to Doris, that no one important was listening. But here I am. Jacob looked down at his plate. Lips tight. I was prepared, Elaine continued, to invest $2 million into your company, to help you expand, hire, grow. But I don't invest in businesses that lack character. And I certainly don't invest in people who humiliate women like Doris. Women who help, who show up, who fix what others throw away. A collective gasp whispered around the table. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked at Doris, others avoided her gaze altogether. Twist. Delivered. Elaine glanced once more around the room. You all came here tonight for food, wine, status, but what you've been served is a mirror, and the reflection is unpleasant. She turned to Doris. Would you like to go somewhere that values you? Doris blinked, caught off guard. Because I'm done here. The finality in Elaine's voice was unmistakable. She picked up her purse with smooth grace and looped it over her shoulder. And then something extraordinary happened. A guest halfway down the table, a man in his 60s wearing a navy sports coat, stood. I've heard enough, he said softly, but with conviction. Elaine's right. That woman... He pointed to Doris. Deserves better than this. Another woman stood. I don't know what's worse, their behavior or the fact that we all sat here and let it happen. More chairs scraped back. In twos and threes, the guests began rising. Not everyone, but enough to shift the atmosphere entirely. Jacob stood too, panic flaring in his eyes. Wait, can we just talk about this? No, Elaine said. You had your chance. This wasn't about money. It was about dignity, and you failed. She placed her hand gently on Doris's shoulder. Come with me. Let's find somewhere with decent coffee and better company. Doris rose, her eyes wide. Her hands shook slightly, but her back was straight. For a moment, she glanced toward Olivia. Their eyes met, and Olivia looked away. Doris felt the wound open again, but it didn't bleed as much this time. Maybe because something new had begun to grow over it. Something like pride. The marble floor of the Worthington Country Club gleamed under crystal chandeliers, but its elegance couldn't mask the undercurrent of chaos now rippling through the room. Guests whispered in small, tight circles, shooting glances at the door where Elaine and Doris had exited moments ago. Back at the far end of the dining room, a young woman, barely in her 20s, sat in silence, phone tilted low in her hand. She wore a simple black dress and a quiet curiosity. Her name was Kayla, a junior journalist for a digital culture magazine. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her cousin had dragged her along as a +1, promising rich people drama and free champagne. She'd been filming discreetly when the confrontation between Elaine and the Thompsons reached its boiling point. Not with intent to embarrass, just habit. She documented human behavior the way wildlife photographers captured predators mid-pounce. Now, in her phone, sat a 1-minute clip. Elaine Carson, multimillionaire investor, standing beside a disheveled older woman declaring, "I don't invest in people who humiliate women like Doris, women who help, who show up, who fix what others throw away." Kayla didn't upload it immediately. She watched it again, heart pounding, then again. The power in Elaine's voice, the stillness on Doris's face, the gasp from guests. The camera had caught it all, the injustice, the reversal, the quiet dignity that didn't scream but still struck like thunder. She added a caption. This woman came to her daughter's in-laws party and was insulted until a billionaire saw her worth. Doris deserves better. Real class. Elaine Carson. She hit upload. By the time Doris and Elaine reached the parking lot, the air had grown cooler. A soft breeze carried the scent of spring blooms from the carefully manicured hedges. Elaine paused beside her sleek black sedan. "Would you like a ride?" Doris shook her head. "No, thank you. I have my car." Elaine smiled, then reached into her bag and handed Doris a simple business card. "If you ever need a friend or a reference for anything, you call me." Doris took it gently. "Why did you do all that in there?" Elaine's smile faded slightly. "Because you reminded me of my mother. She raised me on secondhand clothes and stubbornness. Never asked for a handout. Just gave and gave and gave. I didn't always understand what that meant, but now I do." Doris nodded slowly. "I didn't come to be defended. I came because my daughter asked." Elaine looked at her for a long moment. "Then your daughter is luckier than she realizes." Inside the club, Jacob was livid, his face flushed red, not from embarrassment anymore, but from the pinging of his phone. Notification after notification, texts from colleagues, emails from staff, even a call from a journalist asking for comment. "What the hell is happening?" he barked, pacing the hallway outside the ballroom. Marilyn followed him, nervously scrolling her own phone. "Jacob, you need to do damage control. This is spreading." "What's spreading?" She showed him the video, a single TikTok clip, already at 112,000 views, climbing fast. "No, no, no," he muttered. "This can't go viral. Who the hell filmed that?" In the clip, Elaine's words rang again. "The world needs more people who repair than those who destroy." In the comments, users were lining up behind meaning Doris deserves better. Some even tracked down Doris's name, labeling her the fixer mom. Artists began sketching scenes from the dinner. Commentators broke it down frame by frame. "Why Elaine Carson's stand is everything right now," one caption read. Within the hour, it was everywhere. At home, Doris sat in her armchair, unaware of her sudden internet fame. She was sipping tea, shoes off, the television silent. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt still. Not because she'd won, but because for the first time in years, someone had drawn a line around her in public and said, "You belong." And even though it didn't change the past, it mattered. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Text, "Thank you for reminding the world that quiet dignity matters." EC. She smiled faintly and set the phone down. Then the doorbell rang. Back at the country club, Jacob stood at the window, fists clenched. Elaine's words echoed in his mind, along with the sound of chairs scraping back and guests walking out, choosing decency over status. He turned to Marilyn. "This could destroy the deal." Marilyn said nothing. Her expression was unreadable. Then from behind him, someone chuckled. Elaine. Jacob spun. She stood in the doorway, calm as ever. "I forgot my wrap," she said, then paused. "Oh, and by the way," she turned to face him fully. "Sometimes justice doesn't need a courtroom, just the internet." She left without waiting for a response. The evening air was gentler outside the Worthington Hills Country Club, as if the universe itself had sighed with relief once Doris and Elaine stepped away from the chaos within. The sky was a soft blend of navy and violet, the stars slowly revealing themselves above the tree line. Elaine opened the passenger door of her car and gestured for Doris to enter. "Come on," she said with a kind smile. "Let's find a place that serves a decent meal and doesn't require a pedigree to sit at the table." Doris hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. Her legs were sore, her heart still raw. But something in Elaine's voice felt like a balm. Not pity, not performance, but genuine regard. She slid into the leather seat, still warm from the sun. They didn't speak much on the short drive. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was companionable, the kind that forms when two people have already said the important things with actions, not words. Elaine drove them to a small bistro tucked between a bookstore and a barber shop. Nothing grand, but cozy and warm, its windows glowing like a beacon. They chose a corner booth. The waitress, a young woman with inked arms and tired eyes, greeted them with an easy smile. "Late dinner. Late escape," Elaine replied dryly, and they all chuckled. Menus arrived, but neither woman opened theirs right away. Elaine rested her elbows on the table and looked across at Doris. "You know," she said, "when I was your age, I thought success would shield me from disrespect." Doris raised an eyebrow. "Did it?" Elaine smirked. "Sometimes, but the older I got, the more I realized it's not about shielding, it's about seeing clearly. Who treats you with kindness when they think you're nobody? That's who they really are." Doris stirred her water gently, eyes on the swirls. "I used to think if I gave enough, if I kept showing up, people would eventually see me." Elaine waited. "I raised Olivia alone. Her father passed when she was little. I fixed heaters, microwaves, outlets, took side jobs during holidays, never asked for thanks. I just did it." Doris paused, then added softly, "Tonight I wondered if that was all just foolish." Elaine shook her head. "It wasn't. You were the steady heartbeat behind someone else's future. That kind of love doesn't make headlines, but it should." Their meals arrived. Simple pasta for Doris, grilled salmon for Elaine. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the strange peace that had settled between them. "You know what I've found after 60? Elaine said between bites. "I don't need to win anymore. Not arguments, not admiration. I just need to keep my dignity intact and surround myself with people who know what that word means." Doris smiled. "That's a high bar these days. Then it weeds out the noise." They talked like old friends, about grief and purpose, about how the world starts moving faster as your joints slow down. They shared stories of lost spouses, stubborn independence, and the strange ache of being useful in a world that often overlooks the experienced for the loud. For the first time in years, Doris didn't feel like she had to prove her worth to anyone. She simply was. Halfway through dessert, a shared slice of apple pie, Doris's phone buzzed. She picked it up, expecting nothing, maybe a scam call or a group coupon alert, but it was a message from Olivia. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Can we meet tomorrow? I want to talk, just us. Please." Doris stared at the screen for a long moment. Elaine saw the shift in her expression and asked gently, "Good news?" "I don't know yet," Doris whispered. "It's from my daughter. She wants to talk." Elaine didn't press. "Do you want to?" "I'm not sure," Doris admitted. "Part of me wants to rush over and hug her. Another part—" She trailed off, folding the napkin in her lap. Elaine nodded. "That second part, listen to her too. She's the one that's learned to protect you." Doris exhaled, reading the message again. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard before she typed back, "Okay, tomorrow, just us." She hit send. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of what might come next, because even if Olivia didn't say all the right words, even if the apology felt thin or late, Doris had learned something tonight. Her worth wasn't contingent on being wanted. It had always been there. It had just taken the right mirror, held by the right person, for her to see it again. Elaine raised her glass. To the women who fix things, quietly, completely, and without applause. Doris clinked her water glass against hers. And to the women who refuse to let the world forget them. They finished their meal in peace, their laughter soft, their conversation deepening into the kind of dialogue that binds strangers into allies. Outside, the sky had turned black velvet. The stars no longer hid, and neither did Doris. The sun had barely broken through the morning haze when Doris stepped into the small corner cafe Olivia had chosen for their meeting. It wasn't fancy. No crystal chandeliers, no valet parking, no carefully curated wine list, just chipped ceramic mugs, the smell of fresh bread, and the hum of quiet conversation. Doris picked a seat by the window. She didn't order anything. Her hands were too still on the table, her gaze focused outside, watching life go by like a passenger unsure when to get off. A soft bell above the door jingled. Olivia. Her daughter moved slowly, as if the weight of her choices had settled in her bones overnight. She wore no makeup, her hair hastily tied back. Not the polished woman Doris usually saw at formal events. This was Olivia, unguarded and trembling. "Mom," she whispered. Doris stood, and for a second they just looked at each other, two women divided by years of silence, pride, and the aching question of who stopped trying first. Then Olivia walked forward and hugged her, tight, raw, apologetic. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into her mother's shoulder. "I let them treat you like you were invisible, like you were less, and I didn't stop it." Doris didn't cry, not because she wasn't moved, but because she'd already shed those tears in private. What she felt now wasn't sorrow. It was stillness, like calm water after a storm. They sat down. Olivia wiped her eyes with a napkin. "I kept telling myself I was protecting you, that if I just stayed quiet, things would smooth over, that you didn't need me to fight for you." Doris listened, her fingers curled around her teacup. Warmth spread into her palms. She didn't interrupt. "But the truth is," Olivia continued, "I was scared of rocking the boat with Jacob's family, of seeming ungrateful, of losing security." Doris tilted her head gently. And I forgot who taught me what real strength looks like," Olivia said through a choked breath. "It's not in money or polished invitations. It's in microwaving leftover soup on your birthday because you used every dollar for my textbooks. It's in fixing broken things with your bare hands. It's in not asking for credit even when you deserve a parade." A tear escaped the corner of Doris's eye now, but it wasn't sadness. "You didn't deserve last night," Olivia whispered, "and you didn't deserve how I've made you feel for years." Doris reached across the table, placing her hand over Olivia's. "You were doing the best you could with what you knew. Now you know better." Olivia's lip quivered. "You're not angry?" "No," Doris said softly, "because anger eats more than it feeds, and you're here now." Silence passed like a shared prayer. Then Doris added, "But I want you to do something, not for me, but for you." "What?" "Make things right, not to repay me, but so you don't carry regret like luggage through the rest of your life." Olivia nodded slowly. They sat a while longer, sipping tea, sharing memories. At one point, Olivia laughed, really laughed, remembering the time their kitchen caught fire because Doris tried to toast a grilled cheese with a clothes iron. That laugh echoed something deep and familiar, a piece of her childhood that had been buried under years of quiet resentment and external approval. When they parted, Olivia hugged her again, this time longer, firmer. "I love you, Mom." "I know." That afternoon, Olivia walked into the penthouse apartment she once thought was the prize of her marriage. Everything was as she'd left it. Cold marble floors, spotless countertops, and the faint smell of cedar wood diffused artificially into the air. Jacob was at the kitchen island typing something on his tablet. He didn't look up. "We lost the deal," he said flatly. "Elaine Carson's firm pulled out this morning." Olivia placed her purse down calmly. "I know." He looked up then, irritation flashing in his eyes. "You know?" "What do you mean, you know?" "I spoke to her," Olivia replied. Jacob blinked. "You what?" "She called me, wanted to make sure I was okay. She said, 'You blamed everything on me.'" Jacob scoffed, standing. "I was trying to salvage a deal you tanked with your mother's circus act." "No," Olivia said quietly. "You did that. You made a choice. You humiliated her, Jacob." "She humiliated us by showing up like a garage mechanic. She showed up because I asked her to, and she helped a stranger on the highway while you were too busy calculating how much wine to pour for your investors." Jacob's face darkened. "Don't turn this into some morality tale." "It is a morality tale, one where I finally realized I married the wrong leading man." He laughed. "Don't be dramatic. You want to leave over one dinner party?" Olivia stared at him. "I'm not leaving because of the dinner. I'm leaving because that dinner just showed me what I've been ignoring for years. You never saw me as an equal. You never saw my mother as human. And now that your mask's fallen, I see the truth. You'll regret this." "No," she said, voice steady. "Regret is staying in a place that punishes people for having a heart." Jacob moved to say something, but Olivia had already picked up her purse. She didn't slam the door. She didn't need to. Silence can speak louder than rage. 2 months later, the small, once-abandoned storefront at the corner of Maple and Fifth bore a hand-painted wooden sign, "Mother Fixer's Repair Shop." Below it, in smaller lettering, "Free repairs for seniors and single moms, by appointment or walk-in." Inside, the scent of warm solder and lemon polish filled the air. Light streamed through tall front windows, landing on rows of neatly arranged tools and labeled bins full of screws, wires, and old appliance parts. A mismatched couch sat in the corner beside a coffee pot and a plate of sugar cookies. It didn't feel like a shop. It felt like someone's living room had grown brave enough to fix things. At the center of it all, wearing denim overalls and a soft gray cardigan, stood Doris. Her hands moved with practiced ease, tightening a screw on an old toaster. Across from her, a woman in her 30s with a toddler on her hip watched intently. "That should do it," Doris said, wiping her hands. "Try it now." The young woman plugged the toaster in, pressed the lever, and moments later the coils glowed red. The toddler clapped. So did his mother. "I haven't had toast since the week my husband left," she said, eyes welling. "Thank you." Doris only smiled. "You're welcome, sweetie. One less thing to worry about." This had become her life now. Not redemption, not revenge, just restoration. She hadn't expected Elaine to return after that night at the country club. But 1 week later, Elaine appeared at her door with a folder full of ideas and a simple offer. "Let's build something that doesn't require anyone to wear masks." Doris resisted at first. She'd never been good at asking for help, much less accepting large sums of money from near strangers. But Elaine had smiled that calm, persistent smile. "This isn't charity, Doris. This is investment in you, in the community, and in the kind of kindness that doesn't make headlines but changes lives." So they'd started small. Elaine handled the logistics and paperwork. Doris sourced tools from donation centers. A local hardware store owner, having seen the viral TikTok video of Elaine defending Doris, insisted on supplying screws and washers at cost. Others soon followed. Some volunteered to sweep, others to paint. The whole neighborhood, it seemed, had been waiting for someone to bring back purpose to that dusty corner of town. They just didn't know it would be her. Doris never advertised. She didn't need to. People came. quietly, humbly, with broken things in their hands and heavier things in their hearts. Old radios, broken fans, unplugged memories. They came because they'd heard what others were saying. She won't judge. She just fixes. A boy who dropped out of school started coming by every Thursday. Doris taught him how to replace power cords and repair hair dryers. He told her he wanted to open his own repair business one day. She nodded. You'll get there. Start by fixing one thing at a time. She didn't give lectures. She gave space. And little by little, her corner shop became something more. It became a place of return. Some nights, when the last guest had gone and the tools were neatly packed away, Doris would stand at the doorway with a mug of chamomile tea, watching people walk past and smile as they saw the shop sign glowing gently under the porch light. Mother Fixer, they called her. It started with a little girl who told her teacher, "The lady who fixed my grandma's radio is like a fixer mom. She fixes everything." The name stuck. Not in headlines, not in press releases, just in whispered reverence, passed from neighbor to neighbor. No one ever asked her about the party at Worthington Hills. The video came and went, a brief flash in the digital noise. But what remained was the impression of a woman who didn't raise her voice to demand respect, but who received it anyway. Not because of wealth, not because of revenge, but because she kept showing up. Because she still believed in doing what was right even when no one was watching. A full year had passed. The seasons had circled again, spring buds blooming over sidewalks that once crunched beneath winter boots, and the steady thrum of neighborhood life beating louder than ever. Maple and Fifth had changed. Where once there were vacant lots and whispers of decline, now there was laughter, movement, and stories being repaired alongside appliances. The shop still stood, unchanged in its mission, Mother Fixer's repair shop. The hand-painted sign had faded slightly in the sun, but the meaning had only deepened. Doris sat at her usual workbench near the front window. Her hair, fully gray now, was tied back in a neat bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. In her lap, a battered waffle maker chattered with loose screws and decades of use. She worked slowly, lovingly, removing corrosion like an archaeologist brushing dust from buried treasure. She didn't rush anymore. She didn't have to. The door chimed. A boy passed by, maybe 10 years old, tugging his little sister along in a puffy purple coat. He looked through the window, pointed, and whispered loudly enough for Doris to hear, "That's her. That's the lady who saved my mom last year. Fixed her heater for free during the snowstorm." His sister's eyes widened. She turned to look at Doris like she was a folk hero out of bedtime stories. Doris didn't say anything, just smiled softly and waved. She returned to her work. The heater the boy had spoken of had been from an old woman, a single mom with 3 kids and 2 jobs, too proud to ask for help. Doris had fixed the unit in 30 minutes, cleaned out the vents, and gave the woman a bag of canned soup on her way out. No one knew, no pictures, no post online, just warmth in a house that needed it. These were the kinds of things people remembered. A phone buzzed from the corner. It was Olivia. Doris wiped her hands and checked the message. "Thinking of you today. Just finished the new shelter project. All 48 rooms open next week. We did it, Mom. We really did it." She read it twice. Then she looked at the calendar pinned above the workbench. Exactly 1 year since the birthday party, the one that changed everything. After Jacob had left, taking his expensive suits and hollow ambitions with him, Olivia had stepped into something deeper, something real. With Elaine's mentorship and her own long, latent compassion awakened, Olivia had taken a new job, Director of Outreach and Community Development for a regional nonprofit focused on aiding elderly people living alone. She visited homes now, not penthouses. She shook hands with women who had raised 3 kids alone. She learned how to budget for hot meals instead of social galas. And most importantly, she'd come home. Not just to her city, but to her mother. They met often now, not always to talk about the past, but to build something better from it. Doris would share advice on how to run donation drives, how to talk to people who were too proud to ask for help. Olivia would take notes, real ones, pen and paper. Like every word her mother spoke mattered, because now she understood. They always had. Doris returned to the waffle maker. Inside, she saw crumbs from 100 breakfasts, burnt batter caked like memory. She brushed it away with care, rewiring the frayed cord with the same patience she once used to braid Olivia's hair before school. Her fingers were slower now, but her purpose had never been sharper. A soft knock on the window made her look up. Elaine, elegant as ever in a forest green coat, coffee in hand. Doris opened the door. "You don't knock, you walk in. That's the rule." Elaine grinned. "It's your castle, Mother Fixer. I'm just visiting." They hugged briefly. Familiar now. Easy. Elaine glanced around. "Still fixing the world one broken plug at a time?" "Trying to," Doris said. "Some days it fights back." They laughed. Elaine handed over the coffee. "From your favorite place, still no sugar, you're stubborn." "Consistency is underrated," Doris replied. They settled into the 2 wooden chairs near the back, where sun slanted through blinds and caught flecks of dust in its beams. The shop was quiet for now, but the board had 4 names for afternoon appointments: a broken kettle, a radio, a sewing machine, each one a story. "You've built something beautiful here," Elaine said, eyes scanning the shelves. "I didn't build it alone." "No," Elaine replied, "but only someone like you could make it matter." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable. Then Doris rose and walked to the back shelf. She pulled out a photo frame, old wood slightly chipped at the corners. Inside, a faded picture. Olivia, no more than 6 years old, sitting on Doris's lap, her cheeks smeared with cake and her arms wrapped tightly around her mother's neck. Doris stared at it. Tears didn't fall, but her breath caught slightly in her chest. Elaine watched, saying nothing. After a moment, Doris whispered, "I never needed recognition." She paused. "But it's nice to know someone was watching."